What an absolute pleasure to welcome you all. This is lovely and a treat to have Grayson Perry with us. He did say that he would dress for the occasion, and he hasn't disappointed, I'm very pleased to say. As some of you will know, I write the weekly interview in The Guardian, and this session will appear in Monday's paper as the Monday interview for G2. But this is something of an experiment, as for this one, all of the questions will be coming from you. I think we should probably start by thanking Grayson for being brave enough to face 400 or 500 Guardian interviewers. If you've ever read any of the Guardian readers' comments online, you will know that Guardian readers can be quite a scary bunch. But I'm sure you won't be today. How we've organised it is some of you have already submitted questions in advance, which I will put to Grayson through the first half of the session, and the second half of the session, it's over to you to ask questions. All I would say is please don't ask Grayson any questions about forthcoming projects, because he's requested he would rather not talk about that. But apart from that, he is all yours. And Grayson, I do have to say that the questions that have been submitted so far are a credit to your fans' imagination.
Well, it's good. I did encourage it in people, I hope.
I would say that my particular favourite was from one Philippa Perry, who I believe is your wife.
Yes.
And she tweeted the rather excellent question, "What's for dinner?"
Yeah, well, she'd know that. I'm an old-fashioned man, as you can see.
Another favourite of mine was, "What hair conditioner do you use?"
None. Less and less.
That was from someone called Gorilla in Exile. And I should explain at this point that many of the questions that have been submitted under Guardian readers' online usernames. For example, Gorilla in Exile. At least I'm assuming that's not their real name. So I will endeavour to pronounce all of them correctly, but they're not always that easy. But from the questions, some themes, very obvious themes emerge very clearly, and I've tried to organise them in that way. And the first one, unsurprisingly, is your choice of medium, ceramics.
Yeah.
A lady called Madam's Chat would like me to ask you this. She says, how do you feel about the word ceramicist? Because we don't call artists paperists if they draw on paper. So why are you a ceramicist, and do you mind?
I don't call myself a ceramicist. I call myself an artist. And if I happen to use pottery, ceramicist is sounds a bit pretentious, doesn't it? And one of the things that I was aware of from very early on in my career was the vanity of small differences. That's a Freudian term, and it means that we hate no one quite so much as our near neighbour. You know, so because there's always those sort of micro niches in society, and we tend to hate the people who might be mistaken for us. And so artists hate craftspeople on the whole because they're almost artists in some ways, or they can overlap hugely. And so, you know, the doing pottery was quite a charged thing because it was sort of like, it's okay for Duchamp to get a urinal, which is also, of course, coincidentally made of ceramic, and taken that into the art gallery, and that's a bold conceptual move to bring that and say it's a ready-made and it's an artwork, 100 years old now. But to actually sort of make pots and say that's art, that was a little bit kind of suburban almost. And so I like the charge around that vanity of small differences that stuck pretty much to the present day. People still kind of slightly edgy around the idea that a craft medium, particularly one that I treat in a very traditional way, I use completely traditional techniques, it unnerves them because I'm not kind of radicalizing it in a way. Because I'm more interested in the content and in the social context of where the medium lies, rather than being, you know, a ceramicist is someone who experiments with the medium, you know, because there's lots of people out there in ceramic land who push the boundaries of what a pot is. And that's great, that's what they do. Me, I'm not really interested. Innovation for me is terribly overrated. And I kind of go to museums, see something, and do my version of it.
Julie Brooks wanted to know, but why the pot itself? Because you could do ceramics in any other form. Why the pot? Why does that?
Because it's the classic cliche form for ceramics. You know, it's like right from its inception, pretty much the vase was always for display. It wasn't really a functional ceramics. So I tend to concentrate on the vase because it's a very traditional and ancient form of sort of craft display, rather than, so it hasn't got that kind of burden of the function, like a teapot or a teacup or a plate has. So I tend to concentrate on the vase because it sort of sits uneasily. I like it. Is it a sculpture? You know, but it's also most of the sort of things I do are really drawing and painting and collage. And so it's perfect for me, you know, because it slightly unsettles the genres and boundaries around conception. And if you can still do that in the art world, you're doing well. Because let's face it, you know, most things have been done. So I'm always looking for areas of discomfort in the art world, you know, and a lot of them around class and the kind of vanity of the intellectuals and things like that. The market still has a little bit of a charge around it. But you know, the art world is a well-trampled zone in terms of being a rebel. So it's very hard to upset the art world. It's really difficult. And if you've done it, you're doing really well. I wouldn't say I'm doing it anymore. I'm an old uncle now.
People have asked lots and lots of questions about your exhibition at the British Museum, which just completed last month, The Tomb of the Unknown Craftsman. And this question about whether you are a craftsman or an artist and what the distinction is came up in lots of different forms of questions. Chapel Forth 1 wanted to know, was the exhibition a deliberate attempt to elevate the field of crafts and decorative art and open up the debate about the stature of crafts in relation to art? Do you think there will ever come a time where craft is seen to be equal to fine art?
That's interesting because it's like, what makes it equal? You know, is it about the auction price? Because if you know, you've got the rise of the Oriental market now, the Chinese art market, and they're paying millions and millions of pounds for craftsman-made ceramics. You know, that's the kind of prestige. So we might get a shift within the overall visual art world as the Chinese become more potent within the art world system, and that would be interesting. But then the exhibition, I called it that as slightly provocative because I'm very much embedded in the contemporary art world. But of course, if you go to the Tate, every scrap of paper, every piece of poo, literally, you know, is only significant because it has a famous name attached. That's a lot of the time. That's the only thing that makes it significant. Whereas most of the things in the British Museum are anonymous. We don't know who made them, yet they are still very significant. So I wanted to kind of say that there are other qualities rather than the kind of celebrity of the artist that makes something. Because as an artist, I'm very aware of what I call Picasso napkin syndrome, which is this sort of fact that I've got this kind of 20th century version of the Midas touch, where if I do a little doodle, it's worth money. And that's quite a weird and horrifying curse if you're in the creative business, because you become incredibly self-conscious. And so I wanted to make a little point about that. And of course, a lot of the objects that I love, you know, when I go into, if I go into I don't know, an old church or something, what makes me go, and sometimes literally cry, is the craftsmanship often. I mean, obviously the art of it, the sort of beautiful aesthetic realization of it is important, but often it's the quality of the craftsmanship that I'm in awe of, because a lot of those skills are lost. And so when I go to an art gallery, I want to see something special. I don't want to see something where I could think it up in the bath and just phone it in. You know, I want to see something where somebody, because it seems to be, you know, that the art as a contemporary art has become this sort of baggy old bag you can bung any old thing in. And people say, oh, it's art. You know, even Michael Stone, the terrorist, said when he was caught trying to bring a bomb into Stormont, oh, it's performance art. You know, and so I kind of, and people, they'll do something funny, and then they think, oh, that's art. I say, yeah, it's funny, but it's not very good art.
Well, Grayson, one of our readers, Busy Squid, said, how do you know if you are an artist? How do you know if what you've created is art? So what's your measure of how you distinguish?
Well, I suppose that I look at the art world as a kind of little sort of tribal culture. And so therefore, if I'm directing my practice at that culture, my tribe, my village, if you like, and so I kind of face that audience metaphorically when I'm making things, and that's who I'm making it for. And so that's how I decide I'm making art.
So do you mean that the audience, if the audience are appreciators of art and you're serving the audience, that makes what you give them art? Is that?
Well, I'm making it for that context.
Right.
You know, that's it's kind of the context of the object, because the art gallery and, you know, Duchamp said, you know, in the future artists would be people who just point. You know, that's art, that is. And I say that's fair enough, you know, but there's also is that sort of, I think there is a kind of quality of art that I think a lot of people have missed. You know, the thing that is, and I think how you find out what the quality of art is by looking at loads of art, old and new and everything, and then you get an accumulated kind of aesthetic reference point about what is good art. And that's why you have a connoisseur. That's why, you have people who know about art. That's what they've done. They've looked and they can assess whether something is good, because they've looked at loads of other good art and they think, has this got it in all this? That's also surprising, but it's also got what I think of as good art. And I think I try to make that. And so I'm constantly assessing what I'm making. Is that work in that context?
But that question that some of the readers were interested in about, about whether your kind of art would be rated in the same category as fine art, and whether that will ever be, and it's interesting that you came back and said, well, that would perhaps depend partly upon whether it ever generated that kind of revenue, whether the price...
Oh, I don't think there's... I mean,
but it's not just...
No, it's about the... I've always exhibited within the fine art context. I trained as an artist. I've always defined myself as an artist. I don't really call myself a potter, although but, Damien Hirst doesn't call himself a taxidermist, It's like, and potters say to me, does this mean that the art will now take ceramics more seriously? And I say, no, It means that it'll take Grayson Perry more seriously. And if you want to come along and do ceramics, fine, have a go. I've probably queered the pitch, though.
Several readers were interested to know about the relationship between your art and therapy. Sharon Walker said, is it a form of therapy for you? Edie in Berlin said, how has being married to a psychotherapist influenced your work? And are there parallels between practicing art and practicing therapy?
Therapy's been a huge influence, and yes, being married to a therapist has been amazingly influential, because we talk all the time about therapy issues, and I think it's a very clear-eyed way of looking at the world, and I'm interested in the clarity, the sort of truth-seeking element of it. I think that's, for me, is the most useful thing in art, because a lot of artists think that therapy will kind of wash away their talent almost if they had it. Their quirks are their talent, and I would say no. It's like someone clearing up your tool shed. But if my art is my art therapy, yes. If I look back at my work before pre-therapy, there were lots of elements. I was leaking madly about my issues, and now I kind of do it with awareness. And I look at the work around the time I was having therapy with a lot of interest, because it was a kind of flowering in my work. I really got into top gear at that point, because I found the revelations that came about myself and about the world from therapy very, very exciting.
Am I right that it was towards the end of yours, I think it was 6 years in therapy, that you won the Turner Prize?
Yeah.
Do you think that's a complete coincidence?
Yeah, if you do therapy, you'll win the Turner Prize.
There have been, again, you won't be surprised to hear lots of questions about your bear, Alan Measles.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And you've often said that you think that cuddly toys can almost be thought of as like a god. I think you said, I'm trying to get Alan to become a god. I've always thought there were a lot of similarities between gods and cuddly toys. We tend to project all our good feelings onto them.
Yeah.
Mr. Architect has a question, and it goes like this. He says, my 7-year-old daughter asked me last week, which one do you prefer, Grayson Perry or Alan Measles? He said, I say Grayson Perry, and argued that as the creator of Alan, the choice was obvious. As soon as I said it, I realised it actually didn't make much sense. Because, for example, I prefer Tintin to Hergé. So, she replied, my daughter that is, that she preferred Alan Measles. So Mr. Architect's question is, who is right, and which one do you prefer?
It depends who if I'm going to play the game, of course, Alan is, a deity, and he's my guru and everything, and everything, I owe everything to him, because he's kind of led me out of the kind of war zone of my past into the kind of the sunlit uplands of revelation of my present. So therefore, I would say that he is the senior partner in the thing. But of course, I'm afraid to say that I projected everything onto him. So everything he is, I'm sorry, Alan, he's not present, so he won't hear this. He is, everything, he owes everything to me. I have invented him. Like most gods, I hate to tell this to many people, but most gods were invented by someone, I'm sorry. It's just that I'm in the present. The gods are the famous gods, the person who invented them is a long time ago, so we've forgotten who did it.
Well, there have been some questions about that. Somebody called Kaela asked, if old art venerated gods in if old art venerated gods, then in an increasingly less religious country, what can new art draw on for inspiration?
Well, you can do what I did, invent one.
Yeah.
And because I think that's one of the things I was quite envious of. A lot of the art that I really love, sort of kind of Northern Renaissance altarpieces and things like that. You know, I was always envious of the fact they had this sort of culture around them, or they had their own belief, and they had a definite thing to make art about, and a narrative. They had all the biblical stories to make it, and it was very clear. So what they could concentrate on was the kind of the character, the form, and the style, and they could concentrate on that. And I was a bit envious of that, because for me, I have to come up with the ideas as well, which is a bit of an imposition on the modern artist, you know. And so, that's why I kind of brought Alan into the equation, because then I had something to make art about. You know, that was a kind of, I hate the word spiritual, but was a kind of spiritual entity, you know, that I could kind of use. And then as he becomes more well-known, then he almost sort of fades into the background, and you just look at how he was treated.
And that becomes the...
Yeah, because I found it interesting as a subject.
Alan may or may not be God, but he's certainly a celebrity. And one of the things that a lot of readers were interested in was this question of the artist as a personality. Somebody called Sabobo asks, some critics say that your media-friendly personality is more engaging than your art. Do you think that matters?
Well, one of the first things somebody asked me, or a journalist asked me after I won the Turner Prize, was, are you a lovable character or are you a serious artist? And I kind of replied, you know, is it an either or? You know, can it not be both? I mean, you know, there's other artists who are very media friendly, and we live in a media saturated world. You know, here we are now in Guardian, which is rapidly becoming a kind of brand, you know, of media. And it's, you know, you know, I'm sure artists of the past would have dealt with it in just the same way. You know, if you're in the business of communication and images, then you've got, if you ignore the kind of the media sphere, you're just cutting off your own foot. It's just daft.
It's interesting. Somebody else asked, Catonicus asked, can the work of a reclusive artist get seen at all without the hoopla these days?
Probably it'd be quite difficult. Though I think the myth of the undiscovered artist is actually a myth. Because there's a huge system out there now. You know, there's thousands of galleries and thousands of gallery people who are raking through the studios and constantly on the lookout for the talent because, you know, potentially they're very profitable. And so I don't think that there's these starving geniuses in garrets very much anymore, you know, because the system is too well honed, I think. In the West, I mean, I don't know if there's some guy in India or China or Africa or something, you know, there probably are, but in the West, I don't think. The undiscovered. Van Gogh, you know, that's not going to happen, I don't think. Not in London. Maybe in Manchester.
Jill Rutherford says, do we understand a work of art better if we know something about the artist?
Well, that's the thing, is that understanding is the interesting word in that question, isn't it? Because why do we have to understand it? You know, it's like this understanding has become a kind of swapped with appreciating often. And it's like the idea that if you understand it, then it somehow your experience of the artwork is better.
Than if you merely appreciate it.
It's not a crossword clue, you know. It's, you know, I think there's this idea that if you get the strap line, I mean, I describe a lot, you know, the modern audience's attitude to contemporary art is theme park plus Sudoku. You know, where they kind of want to go, oh my God, it's so sexy, shocking, big, shiny, you know, amazing. But what it's about? What's it about? I don't know. And you know, my attitude to art is it good art? You know, is it giving me visual pleasure on a purely almost poetic level? You know, then I might read the essay afterwards and think, oh well, that's what it's about.
But your art is very autobiographical. Do you think that we need to know anything about you to enjoy your art?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's part of the fun. I mean, you have to have content because, you know, it's a symbiotic relationship with the content. And I have to start somewhere. Like I say, I have to come up with the ideas. You know, if we lived in a very religious age, I wouldn't have to bother. I could just get on with making the things and do it about Jesus or Muhammad or somebody, you know.
One of the things, obviously, that everybody does know about you is, excuse me, I was going to say is that you are known, your alter ego is known as Claire.
Alter ego.
But actually, I think you take issue with the word alter ego, and you say that actually, if you were starting out now, you wouldn't wish to be called Claire. Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you explain a bit about why?
Well, because it's kind of, you know, now I'm more confident. You know, like most things, you know, youth is wasted on the young, you know, and also young trannies, it's wasted on young trannies, you know, when you've got the looks and everything, you know. But because you weren't confident then. And so now I'm much older, I'm a man in a dress. And I'm quite happy to deal with that. But when I was young, you know, it's the orthodoxy of the sort of transvestite culture is that those with high status are the people who look most like women. And so therefore, you kind of think that's what being a tranny is all about. It's about somehow deceiving the world in that you are a woman.
To pass.
Yes, to pass, exactly. And so that was, I bought into that for for quite a while. Then suddenly I thought, no, hang on, this is boring. Why do I want to deceive anybody? This is my personal version of it. And so I suddenly thought, like almost overnight, I said, oh, yeah, I'm a man in a dress. I've got no bosoms here. And so therefore I'm Grayson in a dress, and then I'm Grayson to you now. I'm not sitting here like this going, oh dear, and sort of being all kind of self like that. No.
A reader called Seaside Dave, I think his question may be somewhat out of date in the evolution of Claire and her look, but he says, when you're dressed as Claire, you're the spitting image of my mother-in-law.
Yeah. Well, he's got a very interesting mother-in-law.
Well, I have to say, sitting here, that was my thought as well. He said she shops exclusively at M&S and John Lewis. Where do you shop?
I don't. I have everything made. I mean, this dress was designed by one of the students from over the road here at St Martin's.
Do you have an annual competition for your students? Is that right?
They all make me dress. Well, it's a competition, but it's also a little course. Over the course of about 5 or 6 weeks, I give them a briefing and say what I like, and then I say to them, make me something that I would be embarrassed to wear. Because I challenge you. I challenge you to do it. And they try their hardest, bless them. They're really good. But I get some superb outfits out of it. I really do. They are brilliant students. And I get some absolutely knockout dresses. People are amazed at some of them. They're really good. So they are great. And I give them, a good money price for them. And I give out little prizes for the best ones.
I've heard that they're called Claire's instead of Oscars.
Claire's. Yes, exactly, yeah. It's a very sweet day when we do that.
Carol Beeden wants to know this. She said, in a recent interview, you said Claire never goes to the studio. Making pottery is a dirty business. You don't go to the studio in a nice dress.
Right.
Carol's question is, why does Claire have to be so neat and clean? Doesn't she need a busy space too?
She's not a real person, I hate to tell her, She doesn't have a kind of hinterland. This is it. It's me in a dress, and only when I tend, if people ask me when do I choose to get dressed up?
Yes.
Well, I'm a busy man nowadays, so I tend to dress up when other people dress up, or if I'm doing a show, I dress up. And if other people are putting on a bit of slap, then I will. That's what I said.
Neil Angrove wants to know how you feel about the way that cross-dressing tends to be portrayed in the media. He says, for example, in the character Leslie in Benidorm.
I haven't seen Benidorm.
I must confess I'm not familiar with...
No, I doubt anybody here has.
If
They've read about it in the telly pages, but they've never seen it.
I'm guessing, I may be wrong, that it's not an entirely dignified character, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
The broader question of how cross-dressing is represented in the media.
Well, I think the difficult thing is when you're a tranny, I mean, in my experience, I can only speak for myself here, is that, you're either a psycho killer, like in Psycho, or you are a comic character. And so it's a tough choice for when you're a tranny. What are you going to be? Seedy sex maniac, or, like a drag queen, like a funny character. And so, that's a difficult thing when you're, compelled as a young person to, I really want to dress up, but it's sort of like being compelled to dress up as Coco the Clown. It's quite a tricky thing. So I think that actually shapes, one's attitude to it. And for me, I've kind of embraced it. Yeah, I'm funny. What's the deal? I'm quite happy with that one. If people laugh at me, I kind of think, yeah, natural reaction, I suppose.
Well, that leads us on rather nicely to our next question, which is about humour. You once said, I didn't get here by being serious. I got here by dressing up in frocks and mucking about.
Yeah.
And someone called Scara wants to know, I'd like to know if the humorous content of your work is a deliberate response to a sometimes over-serious art establishment. Another reader called Shay1 puts it slightly differently. And their question goes as follows. Compared to Grayson Perry, most of the young British artists of the 90s were and are humourless, self-important, pretentious bores. Discuss.
Well, that's it. I know quite a few of them, and they're not. They're very funny, a lot of them, and so I wouldn't say that's a very terrible, sweeping, bitter generalisation. Probably a failed artist, but humour. I'm English, and the defining characteristic of an English person is that you're in a permanent state of social dis-ease. Of course, one of our, so therefore we use humour as our main weapon against that. If it eases the situation. And so I'm a typical English person, and so and I'm a very English artist, I think, and so I use humour a lot. It's part of life. People are very funny. In our discourse, in our general lives, we go to the shop or whatever at work, we make jokes all the time, and so I'm just like anybody else. But I suppose I do it in public, and I enjoy it. It's hilarious, And I think what's also a thing, I think that you can deal with really dark issues because earnestness is the biggest crime an Englishman can commit. And so, therefore, you've got to avoid that. And I think that often the most poignant things are that really horrible pit of your stomach swoop from humour to tragedy. And I think that is something I respond to very, very well. And so I try to find that in my own work.
Yes, yeah. I think this name is Two Shilly Half Half. Says, and this is another question on the theme of young British artists, YBAs. It says, given that much of the YBA's success could be attributed to their having gone to college with Damien Hirst, what would you identify as your own lucky break?
Another bitter artist, isn't it? Well, my own lucky break. Well, I think, I kind of rose without trace, I suppose. I sort of plugged along, so it wasn't like a sudden thing, but I think that the lucky breaks, you get 2 or 3 things that come together, and I suppose that there was a point about 2000, and at this point I'd already been practicing for best part of 20 years, when I got an exhibition, a curator called Marianne Boot at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. She came to me. They'd found a pot. She'd been rummaging around for a kind of big ceramics show in the basement of the Stedelijk, and she'd found one of my pots, and I don't think it even had a label. And so she said, "What's this?" Because the guy had bought it for a show quite a while ago. And she sort of researched, and she came to me, and she got to know me a bit. And then she said, "Oh, would you like a show?"
And that's the show that won the Turner Prize.
Yeah. So that was a lucky break.
Fortuitous.
Yeah, that was a good lucky break.
Yeah, lucky break.
Yeah, I think so.
The British Museum exhibition raised some other questions about the relationship between an artist and his financial backers. The exhibition was sponsored by a consultancy firm called Alex Partners and the luxury brand Louis Vuitton.
Yeah.
And obviously your the Walthamstow tapestry, which I think was 2009, had been to some extent a kind of satire on our relationship with luxury brands.
Yeah, well, with brands in general.
With brands in general, that's right, with big brands.
Yeah.
And Leon Zoss, I hope I've pronounced that right, was very interested in this question because he writes, with bankers and the like causing all kinds of social misery, where does the artist stand as a chronicler of contemporary culture in all this? And should artists be rejecting their patronage and attacking this spectrum of our society rather than rubbing up to it? Or has it become impossible to bite the hand that feeds you?
Well, Nam June Paik, the early video artist, said an artist should always bite the hand that feeds him, but not too hard. It's one of my favourite quotes, that one. And I think, art has always had to, it's expensive stuff to put on, and the museum, like the British Museum, my show wouldn't have happened without a sponsor, full stop.
Really?
Yeah, it just would not have happened. It's like an aeroplane going up the runway. If it doesn't reach terminal, the right velocity, it won't take off. And in an exhibition terms, it means getting a sponsor. So
and how do you feel about that?
Point. It's just, you have to chew on it, it's the real thing, and artists in the past, if you look at an altarpiece in a medieval church, quite often the sponsor is meeting the Virgin Mary. He's there saying hello. It's in there. The Wilton diptych in the National Gallery. There's the king meeting the Virgin Mary. And so it's not a kind of new situation. And yeah, maybe, I have joked I'd quite like to do a show sponsored by BAE Systems to see how I deal with it, It'd be quite an interesting one to see how do you play that. Luckily, I had some relatively benign sponsors, so that was quite easy to deal with. But this onus that artists are somehow meant to be political, I've slightly shrink from that, because my job is to make good art, I hope. And the political thing, it might be something I care about, and I'll put it into the work. But my priority is always to make the thing that I think is good art, whatever that quality is. And good politics doesn't necessarily mean that it's good art. They are 2 separate issues. And often people can get them confused. They think, oh, I really agree with that politics. Good on you, mate. Good on Banksy, mate. Does that make it good art? I don't know.
Well, that does lead us nicely on to our last question before we throw it open to the audience. Most of you will probably know that in the job of interviewing, one tends to leave the difficult question till last. So if they storm out in a huff, you've still got something left. This is no exception. And this one comes from Dapper Danielle, and it goes like this. There is a rumour that you are the Chancellor of the Exchequer's favourite artist.
Oh my God.
If this is true, how will you ever live it down?
I think it's got a kind of radical chic cool to it, actually, because the idea, I mean, I'm a Labour voter, I come out now, I mean, I know that's probably more shocking to people than the fact that I'm wearing a dress, but I have voted Labour in every election since I could, and so, yeah, I'm not a supporter of Mr. Osborne's government, and it's kind of, I can't control the government art collection, they buy the work, and I find it actually quite amusing, and, his taste in art, well, how can I question it, it's so good. But it is, the piece in question is that he has it in his office,
That's
I think.
right, I believe he does, yeah.
It's called Print for a Politician,
yeah.
And it's a kind of, a sort of study of kind of the fact that we're all in groups, really, and we're all as bad as each other.
I'm sure
but curiously, the one group that isn't on that print are the Conservatives.
And it's in his office.
Yep.
Go figure. We can now throw it open to the audience. The only thing I need to say is that please don't start asking your question before you've got the microphone in your hand, because otherwise we'll have to ask you to start the question again. It's just for the recording purposes. And we have roving mics. And if we do it in a show of hands, and I think probably 2 at a time, I think we'll do. 3, I was sort of thinking the question often gets
I'll
lost.
forget the first one. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think it's tricky.
So 2 at a time. There was a hand, that gentleman there. Yeah, with the mic there.
Hi, Grayson.
Hello.
If you could live another 200 years as an artist, would you still be a ceramicist, or would you maybe use digital media or something else?
Oh, I do use digital media. I mean, now I probably only make pots about half the time, if that. I mean, on my next show, which I'll only say about how I've done it, I've done it all on Photoshop, basically. So it's like, I'm not a Luddite when it comes to digital media at all. I think one of the interesting things about digital media, though, is that because of the vast menu choice it offers, you can literally do anything with it in some ways. It throws back onto you, what do you want to do? Whereas if you're given a stub of a pencil and say, make some art, you've got to do a pencil drawing, basically, or something very bonkers. But with the pencil stub. The digital media, you have to think, well, is that a Grayson Perry mark I'm making, or shall I adapt it from the endless menu of marks I could make? And so it's quite an interesting, it kind of, and that is the kind of central concern that I have about digital media, is that it throws it back onto ourselves about what are we like, what do we want?
Next question. I think we'll just do them one by one, probably what's best. Lady there.
You talked about setting your students the task of making you something embarrassing to wear. So what's the most humiliating thing that's ever happened to you, and how much did you enjoy it?
Well, it was nothing to do with dressing up, probably. It's probably some hideous faux pas that I've made, like, forgetting someone was coming round for tea or something, and then standing there in the nude and them coming round. No, when I say, about dressing, I think it's a fantasy of humiliation that I kind of have, rather than an actual, because real humiliation, like a lot of kind of sexual fetishes, it's the fantasy of it is much more nicer than the reality.
Questions again, yeah.
So I can't say that there is I've got an embarrassing thing, sorry.
A lady at the front here, in the middle. Yes, can we have a mic to her? Thanks.
Last year, before your exhibition at the British Museum, I was in Costa Rica, and in the pre-Columbian section of the Musée National, I think it was, in San Jose, I came across Alan Measles.
Now, I think there was an attempt made before the session to have that photo ready to be projected.
God, yes.
But I don't know
I did
whether
send
this
it
was
in.
done or not.
Well,
yes.
that is amazing.
It is amazing.
I wish
It's Alan
everybody could
Measles.
see. Let me reach it.
There you go.
Yeah, we hope to have
See,
this
Jesus
projected
was an
for everybody.
astronaut.
There.
Oh my God. That is so spot on. Wow, I wish I could have had that. I mean, one of the things in the exhibition, I don't know if you went to the exhibition, but one of the things was a pre-Columbian doll from a child's grave that had a fairly striking resemblance to Alan Measles as well. But this is really spot on.
It's just extraordinary how, as soon as I saw it, I thought it's Alan.
Well, that was his
and
whole...
then seeing your exhibition.
Well, that's one of his...
Oh.
That's one of his whole shticks, is that he kind of tries to work with other faiths. You know. Because, you know, the conquistadors, when they went to the Central America, that's exactly what they did. They would trash the temple of the traditional belief system and build a church on that site. And because the pilgrimage routes and the kind of physicality of the religion was already in place. And that's what Alan's trying to do, slowly but surely. He's benign, though, you know, at least. You know, he's the god of doubt.
Next question. There's a gentleman there, yes.
Hi, Grayson.
Where am I looking? I like to see the... Oh, that over there, right, okay.
Yeah, are you serious? Am I missing something? Is Alan Measles really a god, or is that, are you being satirical? I mean, a serious question. I don't know if you do.
Well, it's a serious... when I started, thinking about it, maybe about 7 years ago, I think I first sort of started using him in that context. It was a little bit, but often our ideas, when they first crop up, we can dismiss them as trivial and a joke, because our unconscious, in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, he says ideas are like little furry creatures coming out of the undergrowth, and the first one will come out, and all the others are looking to see how it's treated. So we tend to dismiss them very easily. And so when Alan Measles as a god came out, I thought, oh, that's a funny, cute little idea. And I was for an exhibition in Japan, so I thought they'll get that. That'll be funny. But then I realised it's a nice, like a testbed idea for looking at the idea what religion is in the art context. And so I've kept it up. I haven't run out of steam on it in many ways, because it is satirical, yes, but it's also a serious look at how religion forms, and how, what are the structures there, emotional, the ritual. I'm very interested in how ritual is created, because rituals don't come from heaven. Some, guy has to say, well, we're going to go here, we're going to sing this. And the great example I found was the tomb of the unknown warrior in the Westminster Abbey, which had an amazingly elaborate and powerful, moving ritual designed by humans around it, and it had the aura of religion. And so therefore, when people talk about religion and religious rituals, somebody has to design them. So I'm sort of interested in me as an artist having a go. Slowly though, because you have to appreciate that the best religions develop quite organically, on Twitter probably.
Next question. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Yes,
Where are we going? Can you wave?
Yeah, could you wave? It's just that we can't see.
Hello,
You're up there, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, you talked about The Guardian as a brand, and I just wanted to know how important you felt your position, or whether you felt that you were a brand, as you felt that you were part of like the Grayson Perry brand, and whether or not you felt that was an important position or function to an artist's success.
It's interesting because we use the word brand in a very derogatory way a lot of the time. I do it as much as anyone. But I think a brand is also a kind of, it's sort of like momentum. So therefore, it gets you through the bad patches if you've got a good brand. So as an artist, it's quite useful that, you use it to kind of get you opportunities because you have a reputation. And you might, all artists have off periods and make duff works, and it gets you through those. And the brand, they operate, at the worst, brands operate as a kind of shorthand for quality. But as an artist, I'm extremely aware, increasingly, that everything that comes out of the studio, I have to feel it's of the correct quality. And so I can't just sit on my brand at all. Whereas I think the worst, behaviour of brands is when they're all brand and no quality. And so I think for me, to call an artist a brand, it's very useful in getting opportunities, and like the Turner Prize as a brand, if you like, is very useful. Mm-hmm. But in the end, you are judged on your last outing, and so I always try to keep my quality up. But I like making merchandise, but I hope that everything I do and I'm associated with is of good quality. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we use brands often as. I was talking to 250 12-year-olds yesterday, and one of them sort of said, "Do you like Umbro or Donné?" It's like,
Was that the question?
Yeah, that was the question, And they're sort of like, their life.
What was your answer? Umbro or Donné? Which one?
Well, I'm not a sportswear fan particularly, but I'm sort of, it's interesting because I think that what that highlights to me, the whole notion of brands highlights to me, is that people don't have the confidence to make aesthetic decisions totally independently. So they use the brand as a crutch to kind of, that's by so-and-so, therefore that must be good. You know, whereas I suppose as an artist I've developed confidence and skill in saying, no, I like that because I like it.
Next question, there's a gentleman at the back there, yes, with glasses.
Hello, Grayson.
Hello.
What do you think it says about art and art appreciation when you get somebody who's well known and they produce multiple works of art that are basically mass-produced, like a dollar sign, when Andy Warhol produced multiple editions of the dollar sign, and they're now snapped up in their thousands, and they go for a huge amount of money. What does it say about the artist? What does it say about those who are buying the art?
Gosh, I mean, there's all versions. I mean, there's a whole kind of spectrum, if you like, of the idea of the multiple. I mean, and I deal with multiples myself because it makes things affordable and people can have something of a quality that is much more affordable. That's that's how you work it as an artist. But of course, nowadays with digital media and things, it's possible to endlessly make editions that go on, like with photography and prints and things like that. And soon it'll be 3D printing. You'll be able to churn things out effortlessly. And of course, what's his name? John Berger famously said in Ways of Seeing, that the only thing an artwork has nowadays, in the age of reproduction, is its originality. That's the only thing. That's the only thing that is unique to it, is its own uniqueness.
But in the specific instance of the Andy Warhol,
Yeah.
it is actually what he's actually selling. And does, well, although he's deceased now, is a dollar sign.
Yeah, but Andy Warhol set a precedent for the kind of artist as a kind of huckster, and it was a very knowing thing to do. And Damien Hirst is a continuation of that, in that, his shtick was always about the money. The most interesting thing about Damien Hirst is probably his accounts, and not to say that his work isn't interesting as well, but the most interesting thing is probably his accounts, because I always saw his work as, that it was about money. That was what it's about, and the relationship with the collector, And we got the art we deserved. He was the perfect artist for his time, and I used to fantasize that there were art collectors in West London, bragging to each other how one had been ripped off more than the other, because that was part of the shtick. Yeah, I paid that for it. No, I paid much more for the same work than you. And I think that's part of the stick of it. And it's like the idea of sort of value is such a fluctuating and ineffable thing that I think that it's sort of interesting. If anything's as valuable as what people will pay for it. And
it could really be a blank canvas signed by whoever it is, sometimes by Warhol, with a huge price tag, and that would then be art.
Yeah, but in a way, that's depending very much on the originality of the gesture. And now I think we're, once conceptual art has appeared on the Archers, that the game is up, And therefore, as Robert Hughes, the famous art critic, he said, conceptual art, a stale 100-year-old mini tradition as old as the Wright Flyer. So, I think that those kind of bold artistic gestures, I sort of see them as the 20th century, and we are now entering a phase where the art is a different thing. There's more nuance around. And yes, anything can still be art, but is it any bloody good? And that is a much more interesting question, a much more nuanced question. And I think that, the kind of prank, if you like, of just signing a piece of paper and saying that, that's art. That's great. That had to be done to kind of, make that boundary about what art can be and I'm sure it'll be pushed in other little ways. But I still think that there is the quality of art, and I think, as an artist, the USP is I make an object that I hope people will like looking at. It's a real thing. You have to come to the actual gallery to see it. You can't watch it online. And that, for me, is the magic of it. That's what I like doing.
There's a young lady near the front here with her hand up in a blue top.
Can you learn to be an artist, or are you born an artist?
Ah, yes, because that sort of highlights the idea that there's two separate things, because craft, I always think to define the word craft and craftsmanship as something you can learn. I mean, traditionally it would be with an apprenticeship and you would learn. So there's something, I could teach someone how to make a pot, but they couldn't make my next pot. So the idea of art is like the poetry of it, if you like. And at art school, in many times, they do try to teach the poetry of it, but I think that it's the artist's job to bring their life experience to bear on the craft. And so they, an artist, I mean, how one is creative is a very personal thing. And I think everybody, what an artist has to learn when they're at art school is not just how to do a painting or make a sculpture, which is a useful thing, but also are they creative? Do they have their best ideas in the morning, or do they have to be drunk, or do they just I for instance, like drawing a couple of beers and drawing while X Factor is on. It's one of my favourite things, because I'm sort of half awake when I'm doing it. I quite like that. So learning things. So that's how I've become an artist. But I had to find it out for myself. So you learn how to make things, and if I can't do it, I'll ring someone up or get someone else to do it if I can't do it. But what you're actually going to, the art bit, I think, is like bringing your own life into it, So I don't think you can learn to be an artist. You can. That's where therapy is quite good, because you learn who you are and what you want. Not that you need therapy yet.
Next question. I'm trying to see, the light's slightly bright.
At the back there?
Yes.
Hi, Grayson. I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to see your illustrations at Glyndebourne.
Yes.
And thought they were absolutely beautiful. And I wondered if there was a particular novel or album or a work of art that you would love to illustrate, and why?
Ooh. I mean, the favourite question always floors me a bit, because I change my mind so often, what's your favourite tune or whatever, because I change it on a weekly basis. So I don't know. I mean, ooh, golly. I mean, I think of all the books I've loved and the music I've loved. I don't know. I can't really answer that, because I don't have a favourite. I demand sort of mind changers' rights on this one, and say I don't. Yeah. So there's not one that I don't have a favourite anything, pretty much. I think it's because being flexible. I think the minute you have a favourite, it can get a bit rigid, and then when people ask you, "Oh, that's my favourite," and you don't question that. Well, I'm constantly questioning my own attitude to the world. Like for instance, they say someone like Banksy, for instance. When I first saw Banksy and I saw his paintings on the walls around near where I live, I thought, oh, he's an interesting graffiti artist. And then I went off him a bit when he started doing art gallery exhibitions. I thought he was treading on my territory a bit there. And what are you doing selling works for lots of money in art galleries? That's my job, And then I saw the film and I thought, oh, Banksy's he's a pretty clever guy. It's a really good film. So I kind of that's an example of me changing my mind.
Grayson, the graphic novel, Cycle of Violence.
Oh, yeah.
That came up in a few questions from readers who were rather hoping that it might be reprinted, because the cheapest issue they can find, or cheapest edition copy of, is £799.
Wow.
Yes, they said, might there be a cheaper one coming out?
I hate to say this to the person who's paid £795, but I did speak recently to the guy at Atlas Press, and he thought he was going to reproduce it. Yeah, that's an amazing precedent thing, because I don't know if Bradley Wiggins has read, one of your columnists, I believe, in The Guardian, has read that book, but the central character is a Tour de France winning cyclist called Bradley. It's not necessarily a flattering portrait to anybody who's read it, though, but it's very prescient. I did it in 1992, and particularly the era when, because of greenness, cyclists would become the most pinnacle of sporting heroes. Yeah, I'm gifted with that sight as well. Anyway, somebody in the middle here.
Next question, yes, this man at the front.
Alan Moore and Glycon.
Alan Moore?
Yeah,
the graphic novelist.
Yeah, and Glycon, he's God. And you and Alan Measles.
I've never read an Alan Moore book, so I don't know.
He worships a god called Glycon,
oh,
which is
really?
also, glove puppet.
Ah, right, okay.
Never mind.
Well, great minds.
Yeah.
I know he's a very good graphic
Right,
novelist.
okay,
Yeah, but I've never read one, no. A tip to anyone if you ever meet any artist, by the way, which is not pointed at you, but just it reminded me of something. Never say to an artist, oh, your work reminds me of ... That's like the worst thing you can ever say to an artist.
Explain why?
Because even though they might know it, then some of them, like me, might be big enough to admit they just copied. But other ones, they don't like to think they're not original. So, it's like going backstage to your friend who's an actor and sort of say, look at you!
Noted. Any more questions? Sorry, yes? Is this lady here? Yeah.
How far do you consciously try to shock people with your work?
Ooh, I never, I try to shock myself, maybe. But I don't shock is a kind of worn-out old thing. I mean, I suppose there's an element that, you need salt on your potatoes, and I think it's part of the kind of exciting tingle of looking at an artwork. But I think shock is not an art value in itself. So I don't try to shock people. And of course, when you become a kind of a figure in the media, often you're still coated with the first things that got put onto you when you became. So when I came along, I'd done a few works about perhaps more controversial issues, and so therefore I was the bloke that made the shocking pots. Now, if I look at my work now, I don't think it's very shocking anymore, really. And I tried, I suppose, I think one of the things I try to do is when I ever have a little revelation about something, I try to pass that on about the world. Because if something gives me a bit of a jolt, I think, oh, other people might enjoy that jolt. And so maybe that's what I do.
But do you recognise the phenomenon of art that is designed purely to shock and really to do
it's
not
a bit
much else?
boring. I mean, shockingness in itself, it's a bit lame, I think.
Are there any people who you would say have been inaccurately accused of that, of shocking for shock's sake, where actually you think that their art is much more interesting than that?
Ooh, time will tell, won't it? Because the shock wears off. And you're left, let's face it, things like Impressionism and Fauvism, they were seen as shocking in their day, Diaghilev or whatever, they caused riots in the theatre, these things. Now you go along, it's all very, very polite and nice and middle class and terribly, refined. So I think the shock will wear off. And so I think as a value to hang your art on, it's really dodgy.
Right.
Colours and shapes, as David Hockney says. Colours and shapes. That's all you've got to do.
There's a lady there.
You said that you worked with fashion students.
Yes.
I was wondering if you see yourself as perhaps a source of inspiration to fashion designers. There was a Medium Kirchhoff Spring Summer 12 show that just made me think there was lots of little Claires going down the catwalk.
I mean, it's one of my deep fears that I might become fashionable. Because by its very nature, that means you're on the brink of becoming unfashionable. So that is one of my deep fears. And but I have a kind of passing eye on fashion, and I do like, my favourite sort of fashion show are student fashion shows because they're a bit bonkers. Real fashion shows because they have to deal with the market and the kind of whole hoo-ha of it, I find a little bit boring. But in terms of me being an icon in fashion, it's quite funny. My name crops up in the fashion column of The Guardian occasionally, usually in a critical thing. Oh, you don't want to look like Grayson Perry. Which for me is fine. I like it that way.
I think we've got time for a few more questions. This man here at the front.
There's been a bit in the press recently about British artists not being very well represented on the international stage, and I wondered whether your art gets seen much outside the UK and how art galleries outside the UK and visitors outside the UK see your work.
Yeah, I'm not kind of one of those international track artists, really. I think my main problem is I make small things that take a long time, and art galleries are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so those guys that can carry, a couple of DVDs in their pocket and say, oh, here's the exhibition when they get to the place. So they're at an advantage over me. And if you make stuff out of cardboard and sticky tape, you can do all the biennales. Whereas me, to fill a room the size of this stage would take me about 18 months. So I'm at a terrible disadvantage in that situation. And also that I'm slightly kind of I suppose I'm suspicious of that kind of generic international contemporary art thing that is starting to develop, where it's a bit like the shops you see at airports. You kind of all contemporary art now from all different countries is all starting to look a little bit the same. You know, you go to the sort of biennales or banales, as I call them. They're all that art. You know, there's a way. It's like, oh, you mean there's poor people in the world? How shocking! You know, that is like, and it's sort of. There is a sort of look of art that is international contemporary art, and I think all the great sort of culture of the world has come out of often very localized things. And Wilfrid Thesiger, the travel writer, said that the greatest enemy of culture was the internal combustion engine, because that was the start when cultures were starting to blend. And I think now with the internet we're at a point where a Chinese art student looks up and says, "Oh, what is contemporary art?" And then, "Oh yes," and they've kind of learned about contemporary art in the wrong order down the phone. And they do it. And so I'm slightly suspicious of it. That might be my prejudice, because I can't access the amazing riches that are available to these people that can fill Guggenheims one after the other, because they've got great big studios full of assistants. No, I won't get bitter. So I'm quite happy being, but I have shows abroad. I've had nice shows in Japan and in America and in Europe. But yeah, my main problem is I'm a slow artist. That's my main problem.
Grayson, we have run out of time. That was fantastic, but we have one last thing.
Yeah. Oh, really? What's that?
Yeah, it's Grayson's birthday. And
Oh,
we thought
God.
he should have a birthday cake. There we go.
Oh, God, that's really sweet.
Grayson, happy birthday. That was... Oh,
wait,
sing.
We've got no candles to blow out.
No
Don't
candles.
start now. No, I don't think you should sing, because I haven't got a candle, and I feel like the ritual will be spoiled. But no, it's lovely. Look at that. It's green.
All so much. Yeah. It's a slightly unusual colour for a cake. But,
I think it's made up. I think it's spam and avocado.
I think you might be right. Thank you, everyone, so much for your questions. That was quite a novel experience for me, interviewing somebody without actually asking them any questions. I think I quite like it. And I really enjoyed it. Thank you very, very much indeed for all of your questions. Thanks. Thank you.